Rough around the hedges. What is rough around the hedges? I'll leap ahead and tell you how we got our name. Uh, I'll talk later about some major funding we got from chalk cherries and chairs from Katie Horgan's Rough Around the Edges project. And in a whimsical mood, we just chose to call this project Rough Around the Hedges, which seemed entirely opposite. I mean, we all know how important hedgerows are, particularly for wildlife, maintaining their quality and maintaining their continuity, providing corridors, providing food, providing nesting places. It's real habitat issue. So the group we're going to talk about today is all about managing hedges, and it's focused on the central Chilterns area. So what do? We're all about improving hedge management. The group is comprised of a number of existing volunteers from various organisations in and around the Chilterns AONB. And you can see a recent group of them in a victory parade after laying rather successfully a difficult hedge earlier. And I think a couple of people on this call may even be in the picture. My eyes aren't letting me recognise them yet. But we were interested in getting existing volunteers. So we were working on hedge management with people who were committed. We were working with people who were interested in habitat conservation. And the hedge is just such a glorious habitat, not just for wildlife, but it's important for all the other environmental reasons, like preserving soil and land quality. And carbon is, of course, an important issue. But our main focus was in improving hedges for wildlife, both in terms of the quality of the hedge and the connectivity of them. You know, if you look around and you look at hedges, you see gaps and you see all sorts of stuff going on, and lack of ground cover, which isn't necessarily good for our wildlife. So what are we actually doing? Well, currently, we're not focusing on a huge sort of cycle of trying to manage hedges in their totality or help people manage hedges in their totality. We're focusing on hedge laying and the way that can rejuvenate poor quality hedges. And one reason for choosing this is that there are so many of these hedges around. Now, I don't expect you to internalize this chart, and I'm not going to give a test later on. But there's a lot of thought gone into something called the hedgerow management cycle. It's sponsored really by HedgeLink, which is a national organisation looking after hedges. This chart is based on work done by Nigel Adams, a Chilterns farmer and champion hedge layer, who I'll talk about a bit later, and talks about the different stages of a hedge and what you do when things go wrong. And actually, this chart and a lot of other interesting material about hedges is sitting on Lily's community resource page, and it's really worth going and having a look. So back to laying. Why is laying important? Well, a couple of the things you really see in this cycle are, if hedges are over trimmed, they lose quality. Typically, and I'm sure you've all seen this, if you walk by a hedge, about a native hedge in the countryside, round about hedge height, you can see a really hard knuckle. It's like a misshapen fist almost. And underneath, we tend to find lots of gaps, which of course aren't good for wildlife. And this is basically, a hedge that is on its way out when this happens. Now, there's a lot of resource and information about how to trim hedges properly so you don't get to this situation. But I guarantee if you go for a walk, you will see this on your walk. Hopefully, if there are some stems in the hedge, it's not quite so bad. then the appropriate solution is to lay it. There's another extreme too, which is important in this hedge cycle, and you see some of these too. And it's the exact opposite. It's when a hedge is sort of untrimmed, it's uncared for, it's unmanaged. It can get tall and leggy. You know, if you're a whip just put in the ground to help start the hedge off, you don't really want to be a hedge. You want to be a tree. So you need managing to shape you to be a hedge. So we have a situation, if you're not managed and you're untrimmed, things get tall and leggy. You don't get any ground cover, so you don't get those benefits for wildlife. And those two sort of instances that I've identified there are really common in the countryside, and which is why we thought our group, being mostly practical people, would find this most interesting to focus on. Having said all that, how did this project start? Well, it actually started at a site which I'm the lead volunteer at, which is Presswood Nature's Boogs Meadow site in Great Misselthwaite, which is well worth a visit whenever you're there, particularly in May or June when the wildflower meadow is in full bloom. In about 2009, it is a bit before my time on this project, but my colleagues planted a car park hedge to provide a proper barrier between the car park and the wild area. And over time, the hedge grew, and it's been in reasonably good condition for most of its life. It's not a candidate for laying, one might think, but we found as the hedges matured and aged, so have our volunteers. And we're finding it increasingly difficult to manage the machinery and keep it properly laid. And we've got difficulty sometimes with the car park on one side, and right the other side of that hedge that you can see is the Winterbourne section of the River Misbourne, the steep bank. So it's not exactly all safe working conditions there. So we've been thinking what we should do about it. And the solution was, let's lay it. It's not theoretical at the right point in the cycle, but we consulted with Katie Horgan, and we also got Nigel Adams, second time I've dropped his name, around to have a look and analyse this for us. The upshot of this is that we decided we'd go and lay the hedge. We talked to Katie with her Chalk Cherries and Chairs project hat on about putting a project together, got people interested, and sat down and worked it out. And we finally concluded that just for that one hedge, the cost of training, so the job could be done properly, and the cost of the equipment we would need was too much to expend just to get a single result for one hedge. So we decided it wasn't worthwhile. And I think although we could have got some funding for it, we didn't think it right to ask for funding to do just that one hedge, because it would have been a lot of money and, frankly, in my mind, a waste of resource. So what did we do? We decided we would look for community partners doing this. And what sort of partners? Well, we clearly needed people who were interested in nature and were interested in conservation around our area. It would be very useful if they also had access to hedge habitat, so we wouldn't be involved in long discussions about whether we could or couldn't do things. We would have basically an open door or an open hedge. And active volunteers are worth their weight in gold. And we certainly were interested in that. When we went and thought through all this, we just came to the Children's Society. I should say, volunteer for the Children's Society, and they're a very competent group of volunteers, very keen, and a pleasure to work with. So it was an easy discussion, and talking to their boss and the head of conservation, they also were very keen. So where we ended up in talking to Presswood Nature and the Children's Society, the result we got to was that the Children's Society and Presswood Nature agreed to co-sponsor the project. And when I say co-sponsor, I don't mean just put money on the table. I mean support it in bigger ways, like making hedges available to work, generally helping publicise and support the project, providing some skills, providing and lending bits of equipment. And this has all been really useful. And of course, communicating with volunteers. With this in place, we went back to Katie at Chalk, Cherries and Chairs, and through the Rough Around the Edges project, we got the majority funding to do this. The benefit too of working with Katie, because she works out of Beebout at College Lake, as I think many of you know. We also got Beebout and the CCB through Chalk, Cherries and Chairs sitting in this little network and able to provide us expertise and contacts, which was very useful, because that's where we came to another key figure in this, Nigel Adams. So at this stage, we've started to network out from Presswood Nature to the Children's Society to the CCB and to Beebout, which is, I think, quite a powerful combination. I was very pleased with it. And all we had to do now is get the thing underway. Thought I'd share our budget with us. We budgeted just under 4,000 for this, and most of that has gone on, or is going on, and has gone on training of various sorts, and some of it also on equipment and things like PPE. The key things that we needed for the project. So none of this is really wasted. And as you can see, the bulk of that money was provided through Chalk, Cherries and Chairs. But Presswood Nature and Children's Society came to the table as well. So we started spending this money. We started the exercise with a kick-off meeting and a presentation by Nigel Adams. Now, Nigel, I mentioned before, is a champion hedge layer. This is a picture of him younger days. He's now, as he told us on the training course, he's just become a veteran in the veteran class. But he did win the Veterans Championship at the National Hedge Laying Competition for the UK just about a month ago. So he's still at the top of his game. So he couldn't ask in many ways for a better person to do this. And he's been instrumental in a lot of this theory of how to manage hedges. 30 volunteers attended this meeting, mainly from Presswood Nature and the Children's Society, and 30 was our target. So we're pretty happy with that. The next thing we did was get Nigel to run training workshops. Children's Society stepped up and offered some hedges on their Penn Jubilee Wood site. These were probably not ideally suited for beginners. They're quite tall, leggy. I'll talk a bit more in a minute about some of this, but they were quite difficult things to work for volunteers. Nevertheless, we've already done 4 of expected 6 workshops on this. I should say this is a 2-year project, so we're in the latter part of it now. And we already have 26 trained volunteers from a number of nature conservation organisations around the Chilterns, which is very positive. And it's very hands-on and practical training, as you can probably see by glimpsing those photos there. We're on the hedge nearly straight away. And so what we're doing here is, I think, putting skills into existing volunteers so they can go back to their own volunteering environments and contribute more and improve the hedges on the sites that they manage, in broad terms. One more thing I'll mention, just as a sake of interest, is we spent on tools. Hedge laying is, it's a heritage activity, really, as much as anything else. I mean, the skills are dying out. The tractors and flails are winning out, and despite the fact that there are government grants and available for farmers, it's often not the cost-effective solution for them, particularly if they have to pay for a labour component. Of course, with volunteers, you get labour at a very special price. And I thought that was an opportunity for us to look at. And talking about heritage, I could not resist showing you the 4 favourite tools in the collection we bought. We bought some heritage tools. Some of these are nearly a century old, but they're made of brilliant steel, very strong steel, and they sharpen brilliantly. They've been carefully looked after and refurbished over the years. And there's this marvellous guy in Hornsey who collects these and sharpens them up, and will sell them to you for quite a reasonable price. So that's where we were. We got trained. So then we let our volunteers loose, well, in a rather controlled fashion, but and in the 2022 to 23 season, we started doing it in a proper sense. Thought I'd show you this. We actually started earlier this year. I know we're in our 2nd season now, but we got the tail end of the 22-23 winter season. And you can only do this in the winter because you can't muck with hedges, or you've got nesting birds and other things going on. So it's very much a winter activity. This is what the first hedge we did looked like in January 2023. First, it was trained on. Then we did the remaining 2/3 in our own work parties. This is what it looked like in February at the end of the laying season, when we completed the length of the hedge. And usually it's smallish work parties of 6 to 10 people at a time on it. You can see the size of some of those stems that we've laid. And it sort of looks rather bare. I know it's a winter day, but it looks rather bare. But just 5 months later, this is what that hedge looked like. It's got a lot of ground cover. If you look closely at the stems, you can see them just shooting up from the laterals, the laid sections or the pleaches. So we got new growth springing from ground level. We're starting to get ground cover there. One of our jobs now is to maintain it and keep helping this ground cover generate over the next couple of years. But really successful first season. And what we achieved in that first season, and it was half a season because we only had 2 months at it earlier in the year, 127 volunteer hours after the training, which was 27% above our target for the project. So we were pretty happy with that. And we had 75 metres of a rather difficult overgrown hedge laid, which now, as you can see, is looking good. And now we started the 2nd season, October, November. We didn't really get going with training until November again. We've done 2 sessions. And this is the current season to date situation. This is what the next hedge we addressed at Penjubilee Wood looked like in October 2023. It's big. It is certainly overgrown. It's mainly hazel. It's really quite interesting because you can see what's happened in the past. Many years ago, it was just coppiced, and there are big gaps between the coppices at ground level. There are badger tracks going through it, and they don't even have to make the track themselves. And then after it's got to about 5 foot, they've obviously cut it in a sort of effective pollarding exercise. So every stem that was growing from the ground level, from the stool, is been pollarded and it's branched out again, and you get loads of stems which are now about 10 or 15 feet high. Unfortunately, the thick bottom pollarded bit is not quite big enough for us to use as stakes when we're doing proper hedge work, but most of the long thin bits on the top we can use to bind the top of the hedge, and I'll show you a picture of this in a second. But it's really difficult hedge to work. I won't even mention the barbed wire and some other stuff that we found in it. So now in December, now we've finished this hedge, this is what this hedge looks like. And you can see the twirly bits on the top of the hedge are where we've bound stakes together. This is an important part of the process because it stabilizes the hedge line while the cut and laid stems are developing and regaining their strength. This hedge of ours is not quite straight, but it was the natural line of the hedge that we followed. And you can see the way we've got it bound and woven between the stakes at the top. So far this year, our volunteers, now a slightly bigger team, of course, with more people trained, has done 184 extra volunteer hours, and that's over half our full season target. So we're going into Christmas pretty happy. So another 70 meters of overgrown hedge laid. Right, what are we going to do as we go further into 2024? The first thing we will be doing is, we've all just worked at Penn Jubilee Woods so far, but we're going to go out to new sites. I talked about the Boogs Meadow hedge earlier, our inspiration for the start of this project. Well, we are going to lay the first 30 meters of this hedge in January. The problem we're getting at the moment is closing off the car parking spaces, but we will get there. We've got 30 meters of it, which is high enough to be laid. That's a 2022 picture, so it's a bit higher than that now. And then hopefully in a couple of years after, we'll lay the rest. So we're really looking forward to doing that. We have various sites under discussion with other conservation groups, including groups that have sent volunteers on our courses. We got another 180 meters plus in our, I hesitate to call it a hedge bank. It's a bit like developers buying land up on spec, isn't it? But hopefully we've got some access to more hedges, which will, again, the ones we've looked at have really good reason to be improved. More training days, more activities, and we got a wide range of people interested so far, which we're very keen on. In the future, sometime we're going to run out of funding. We need to look to that this year. We've really done this as a project. We need to consolidate the governance of it, and we're probably going to look to strengthen our partnerships with other organisations next year. But meanwhile, we're just going to keep laying hedges and enjoy ourselves. And I am sorry I took so long.
It's not a problem. Thank you so much.